Hello and welcome to my video about how the EU makes laws. We've heard a lot about how it may be very difficult to disentangle ourselves from EU law. But do we actually know how laws are made? Who is involved in the process? What types of laws can be created? And how they are enforced? Well, in this video, I'll answer those questions and tell you everything you really need to know about the EU law making process. So to kick us off, who are the main legislative players? The Commission is the executive body of the European Union, which initiates the legislative process by proposing laws to the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament. It is composed of one commissioner from each member state. It also oversees the application of EU laws. It is known as the guardian of treaties and represents the EU as a whole. Secondly, we have the Council of the European Union, which is one of the main decision makers and represents the governments of each member state. It is made up of the government ministers of the EU countries, who meet to discuss, negotiate and adopt laws and coordinate policies. They also conclude agreements between the EU and other countries. It should not be confused with the European Council, who set out the broad direction of the policies of the EU, or the Council of Europe, which isn't even part of the EU but is another international body. The European Parliament is the other decision maker. Its members are directly elected by the people every 5 years, and it represents the interests of the EU citizens. So what are the main laws? The primary source of law are the treaties, which set out the EU objectives, the powers of the EU institutions, the rules surrounding the 4 freedoms, and the relationship between the EU and its member states. But there are other types of laws too. There are regulations, which are binding on all member states. They are directly applicable, so they do not need to enact any domestic legislation. They ensure uniform application across the EU. Secondly, there are directives. These are also binding. They set out the final goal, but allow the member state to decide how to reach those goals. They only take effect once they've been transposed to national law. Normally, a deadline is given by which a member state must do this. The fact that each member state applies it differently means it can result in an uneven application of the law. Thirdly, there are decisions. These only apply to the member state or institution that the decision is about. And lastly, we have opinions and recommendations, but neither of those have legal force. So how does the lawmaking process work? The EU Treaty provides 2 main processes by which laws are made. So there is the special legislative procedure, which is only used in a small percentage of legislative areas. In principle, it allows the Council to be the sole legislator, but they must consult or get consent from the European Parliament. However, the standard process is the ordinary legislative procedure, which is used for the legislation in most areas of EU competence, and this is what we're going to focus on. So, to commence the ordinary legislative procedure, the Commission submits a legislative proposal to the European Parliament and the Council. They will normally consult with experts, launch white and green papers, and carry out an impact assessment. Proposals may be based on their own initiative, a request of another institution, or by a citizen's initiative. The European Parliament will review the procedure. It will be considered by the relevant parliamentary committee and then in a plenary session by the whole Parliament. The Parliament may accept the proposal or make amendments. The Council will then have their chance to consider the proposal. If they agree, the law will be adopted. If they disagree, it will make its own changes. It will then head back to the European Parliament. The Parliament can make changes, it can accept the amendments, or it can reject them. If the Parliament does want to make changes, the proposal is sent to the Commission, who will give their view on the amended proposal. This is then forwarded to the Council. If the European Parliament and Council cannot reach a consensus, a conciliation committee is convened, which is made up of members of the European Parliament and Council representatives. The aim is to try and agree on a joint text. If they cannot agree, the proposed legislation will end. If they can agree, it will be submitted for a third reading to the European Parliament and the Council. If they both agree, the law will be adopted. So finally, how are laws enforced? If an EU member state fails to comply with an EU law, the Commission may take action against the state by launching an infringement procedure. This can be eventually referred to the Court of Justice of the European Union, the CJEU, who will issue a legally binding judgment. Thanks for listening. Hope this has helped you understand more about the EU lawmaking process. See you soon.